Hello, thank you everyone for joining me this evening. And as you know, my name's Katrin, and tonight I'm going to discuss what we can learn about astronomy through philately. I'm going to show you some examples of what stamps exist globally, celebrating the subject of astronomy. So here we have a perfect example. It's one of my favorite stamps, and it was issued by the United States Postal Service in 2017 to celebrate the total solar eclipse that was seen in the US. It was the first total solar eclipse seen along a very narrow path across the US since 1918. And it's actually one stamp, but the design is made of thermochromic ink, which means that when heat is applied, the color changes. So you can see the stamp on the left there. The moon is obscuring the sun, and you can see the sun's corona, which is the outermost part of the sun's atmosphere around the edge. And when heat is applied to the stamp by pressing a thumb or finger on it, the full moon appears, as you can see on the right-hand side. And this is actually a real photograph of a total solar eclipse taken in Libya in 2006. So as you know, the world of stamp collecting is a science and art in itself, and there are so many facets of the subject. This is just a brief introduction, so it probably lasts about an hour, so probably not very brief. I could talk I could talk for a week or so on the subject, so I've just chosen a few that I hope will interest you all, get you excited and give you a flavour of what it's all about. Okay, so my talk, so just give you an overview. I'm going to be talking about what I think is so great about philately, then just a slide on what astronomy is. Then I'll be giving an introduction on astronomy and philately, then the world's first astronomy stamps, then the global spread of astronomy on stamps, and I've selected a few astronomy stamps issued in the UK, and also I've included a slide this evening on astronomy themed stamps issued in Canada, because I wanted to keep it relevant. Then I'll be looking at assembling an astronomy and space themed collection, and then just a slide then on how to get started in collecting astronomy stamps if you're interested. Okay, so philately, so what? Well, it's a really unusual and creative way of learning about history, geography, science, culture, politics, even animals and comic books, and of course, astronomy and space. There is literally a stamp for everything. So just to give you a few examples, there's a stamp here issued in Egypt in 1986 depicting hieroglyphs. Then in the UK in 2001, the Royal Mail issued a set of 4 stamps celebrating the British weather. And there are even stamps with a dinosaur theme, which is a really interesting branch of thematic philately called paleophilately. And we have a stamp here issued in Switzerland celebrating chemistry. And again, that's another really interesting branch of thematic philately called chemophilately. And 4 stamps here issued in 2019 celebrating hip hop culture in the US. And I found this quote on the internet, which I thought summed up the hobby really well. Stamp collecting is so much more than a hobby. It's a lifestyle, a community. And it is a lifestyle for me now. You know, I'm writing about it and studying, and the community I'm part of online is brilliant. And I've made some fantastic connections. And thanks to social media, philately is, it's really enjoying a boom amongst younger people at the moment. We've got Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. And I just wanted to share a few of these guys out there who are doing some really great things for philately. On the left here, we have the punk philatelist. He has a blog about stamps, and he believes that they are a vibrant expression of pop culture. And we have this chap in the middle here. I'm sure you've probably seen him around, Graham Beck. He has his own YouTube channel called Exploring Stamps, and he's exploring the world one step at a time. My good friend John Simper, who's on the call, he goes by the name of Philately. He's really active on social media, and he offers a monthly subscription on Patreon. And you can subscribe to different tiers at a monthly cost. And John will post out, covers or stamps, whatever you fancy, really. And it's a real kind of a great way to escape and unplug from the modern world. And for me, it's a way to learn, and I love to promote both subjects. Okay, so what is astronomy? So I've tried to cram in an extremely basic overview of astronomy. It's a very detailed science with very specific subfields, including astrophysics, astrobiology, solar astronomy, and planetary science, for example. I'm sure we've all looked to the night sky and viewed constellations, planets, and comets with the naked eye. And many of you may have a telescope, and you've observed galaxies and nebulas. And maths, physics, and chemistry are used to explain the origins, for example, orbits of the planet, star formation, and the composition of nebula, which are composed of dust, hydrogen, and helium. And astronomy dates back to the Babylonians, the Greeks and observers in the Middle East and China, and I'll touch briefly on this later on. And professional astronomy is split into observational and theoretical branches. So observational astronomy is a division of astronomy that is concerned with recording data about the observable universe, and the main source of this information is through electromagnetic radiation. Then we have theoretical astronomy, which is orientated towards the development of computer or analytical models to describe astronomical objects and phenomena. And then these two fields complement each other. Theoretical astronomy seeks to explain observational results, and observations are used to confirm theoretical results. And then, of course, we have cosmology, which is a separate branch of astronomy, and this has appeared on stamps. It's the scientific study of the origin, evolution, and eventual fate of the universe. Okay, so philately is a really great way to learn about astronomy and other branches of the subject through postal history, for example, cancellations, the stamps, and the covers. And it's also, it's the collection, appreciation, and research activities on stamps and other philatelic products such as Cinderella stamps, poster stamps, space mail, which again has its own separate branch called Astro Philately, and it can tell us a lot about astronomy, including the history of spaceflight, astronauts, animals in space, black holes. The list is endless. So I just wanted to share a few Cinderella stamps with you, a few examples of astronomy Cinderella stamps, and I'm sure you'll know, but Cinderella stamps are virtually anything resembling a postage stamp, but they're not issued for postal purposes by a government postal administration. For example, Scout posts, Scout postal stamps. And on the left here, we have the Solar System Rocket Service stamps, which is a really interesting Cinderella issue by a company called Broadway Approvals. And they were based in Denmark Hill in London, and they advertised in boys' comics from 1955 to the 1970s. And you may notice, or not, because the image might be too small, the perforations aren't actually perforations at all. They're just very small ink dots. And on the right there, on May the 5th, 1961, NASA Project Mercury astronaut Alan Shepard, aboard his Freedom 7 capsule, powered by a Redstone booster, he became the first American in space, and his suborbital flight lasted 15 minutes and 28 seconds. And this stamp here was issued by AMVETS, the American veterans, to celebrate the event. And I just want to show you a really good example of an astronomical error on a stamp. So we have the stamp here issued in Czechoslovakia in 1967, and I've just blown up this little corner here to make it bigger and more obvious. And the engraver of the stamp, he's mixed up two letters of the alphabet so that constellations Lepus and Lupus are transposed. So effectively, it looks wrong. And with the growing celebration of space and astronomy through philately, some covers made it beyond our atmosphere into space aboard shuttles or Apollo missions. And the Apollo 15 postal cover incident, for example, is notorious. Unknown to NASA, the crew of Apollo 15, which was Al Worden, David R. Scott, and James B. Irwin, agreed to carry around 400 unauthorized postmark covers aboard the spacecraft and subsequently onto the surface of the moon. And upon the astronauts' return, the covers were postmarked again aboard the recovery ship, the Okinawa, and Hermann Seeger, the German stamp dealer involved in the plan, sold some of these covers for prices in the thousands. And when the news of the flown covers reached NASA, the astronauts were reprimanded and forbidden to fly in space again. So if you ever see this at a local auction house or on eBay for a couple of dollars, buy one, because they're very very expensive. So something I found out recently, which I thought was really interesting, it was in the news recently, the 1 cent magenta, and it was bought by Stanley Gibbons back in June. I contacted Sotheby's in New York because I really wanted to have this catalogue in my collection. Who knows when this stamp will ever be sold again, and I thought it was a really interesting piece of history to have. And when I was leafing through the catalogue, this page really caught my eye, mainly because of this comet stamp here. So it's really common for owners of the 1 cent magenta to mark the back of the stamp. And the guys who've created this catalogue have included images from like infrared photography of the back of the stamp to bring up the postmark, or the marks that the owners used on the stamps. And and I was really interested to find this comet mark. And when I was reading the catalogue, it was explaining this guy, Frederick T. Small. He was an Australian stamp collector. He bought the stamp in 1940 and chose to mark the stamp with a comet. And I'm still trying to get to the bottom of why he chose this image, because it's quite unusual, and it seems that he doesn't have any connection with astronomy. So if anyone knows why Frederick Small chose this image, please let me know. It's quite fascinating. And it's not just about stamps, the Handstamps or Cancellations. Oh, sorry, gone too far. Sorry, yeah, so I'm sure you're all aware it's not just the stamp that's of interest to collectors. Philatelists like to collect first day covers, which is a postage stamp on a postal card or stamped envelope franked on the first day the stamp is authorized for use. And the stamps are affixed to specially designed envelopes, often with the design of the theme that's being celebrated. And here in the UK, we have post office headquarter cards. I'm not sure if you guys have something similar in Canada. And they're postcard sized images of the stamps that have been issued. And yeah, of course, people also like to collect the cancellations and the special hand stamps. So here, just an example of a first day cover. This was issued in Canada in 2018 and celebrates the 150th anniversary of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. The stamp on the left is the Milky Way, which is photographed in Bruce Peninsula Park, Ontario. And on the right then, the stamp illustrates the Northern Lights, which is a photograph, and that was photographed over Church Hill, Manitoba. Hope I pronounced that correctly. And an example here of a first day cover issued in the UK. The stamps were issued to celebrate astronomy. You can see it's on a really decorative first day cover with a solar system. An example here then of the PHQ card. So the 4 images behind it, they're just postcard size images of the stamps that were issued. And on this one, the miniature sheet or souvenir sheet has been affixed to the PHQ card. Okay, so the hand stamps or cancellations alone, they're of interest to some collectors, and for astronomy philatelists, there are some wonderful hand stamps available, and they're simply ink stamps used to cancel the stamp, so they can't be reused, and they come in a variety of shapes and sizes, pictures and ink color. Imaginative hand stamps are really eye-catching, and they form an important part of the cover. And the stamps on the covers, they can be cancelled with the usual first day of issue date stamp at a post office, but often people will send the covers away to a special hand stamp centre to have the stamps cancelled with a special pictorial design adding to the theme of the cover. So I just wanted to show a few examples of pictorial hand stamps. On the top right there, we have 2 ink stamps that were produced for the Space Science issue in 2012. And the bottom right there, we have an ink stamp that was produced for the 50th anniversary of Man on the Moon. But not all postmarks are produced to correspond with the first day issue of a stamp. So for example, there in the middle, we have a brilliant cancellation commemorating Comet Bennett in 1970, and it's perihelion, so it's closest approach to Earth on the 20th of March 1970. And on the left there, in November 2018, a postmark was produced to celebrate InSight, a robotic lander landing on Mars. So, and I actually think this is a really good example where the stamp and the postmark have nothing to do with each other. Because as I'm sure you all know, sometimes postmarks are produced and without a stamp, without a stamp with the same thing. And can you sign my cover, please? It's something I say a lot. Autographs from eminent scientists and astronomers, they form a really special part of my collection. And I have autographs ranging from obviously British astronomers and physicists. So a guy called Dr. Alan Chapman, Ian Ridpath, who's this chap here on the left. He's the chairman of the Astro Space Stamp Society, and he is massively into astronomy and space themed stamps. And more recently, the BBC Sky at Night programme, I posted this first day cover off to Chris Lintott and Pete Lawrence, who present the show, and they very kindly sent it back in with a little note. And Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell, she very kindly agreed to sign a first day cover for me as well. So yeah, really special covers to have in my collection. And this cover here shows an envelope celebrating John Glenn, the first American in space. And I'm not sure if this is an authentic handwritten signature. It could be an auto pen. And an auto pen is a device used for the automatic signing of a signature or autograph. and they're often used when celebrities or famous people get hundreds of letters each day. So during the Apollo missions, you know, everyone was writing to the astronauts wanting autographs, and obviously it's physically impossible for them to do that. So an auto pen was used. And there is a really interesting website out there called Astronaut Auto Pen Guide. It's a really fantastic resource to check if any covers you have signed by astronauts are genuine or not, but you could spend hours on that and still be none the wiser, I think. So it all comes together, the what, the who, and why. You know, you've got these 4 pieces of information. You've got the stamps, the postmark, the signature, and also a cachet. And they can all unravel a factual account about an astronomical event, such as the centenary of general relativity. So here we have the cover with stamps affixed to it. We've got the signatures, the cachet, and we have the postmarks. So each stamp showcases work of Einstein and Hawking. We have Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, gravitational waves, Hawking radiation, 2 black holes colliding, and a black hole. And a silver postmark was used to cancel the stamps on the 1st of July, 2016, the date the stamps were issued. And the cachet tells us what the stamps are celebrating, and it also tells us they were launched at Starmus 2016, which is an international festival focused on celebrating astronomy. And the autographs, the cover is signed by Professor Kip Thorne and Professor Bernard Schutz. And I met Kip Thorne. He's a very famous astrophysicist, and he worked a great deal on the film Interstellar. And I met him back in 2019 at a lecture at Cardiff University, and he had just opened up a new physics laboratory at the university and delivered a talk. And Professor Bernard Schutz, he was there too, and I just recently interviewed him for the Royal Astronomical Society magazine, and he won the gold medal. I think that was the same year, 2018. And Kip Thorne was actually Bernard's PhD supervisor at Caltech University, and they've remained great friends ever since. So it was really good to meet the 2 of them together. And yeah, and I just think this is a really great example of what philately can teach someone about astronomy. So for example, if I passed this cover to someone who knew little about general relativity and cosmology, they could take this away and do hours of research, you know, looking at the details on the stamps. Who are these people? What's Starmus? What's a gravitational wave? So yeah, you could be sent down a rabbit hole just, you know, by having this envelope in your hands. And I wanted to just zoom in and focus on these stamps because I just think they're absolutely fantastic. But as someone pointed out the other day, this equation is wrong. E equals mc squared. It should be a small m, not a capital M. So that was good spotting. But the images are printed on iridescent foil, which really makes them unique and eye-catching. And I myself had great fun researching these because my knowledge of cosmology isn't great. So it's really interesting to delve deep to find out what the words and the diagrams meant. So on the left there, we have Einstein's theory of special relativity and Einstein himself. Then we have Stephen Hawking and his famous Birkenstein-Hawking equation. Then the famous trousers diagram here on the right, which represents 2 black holes colliding. Bottom left, we have Hawking radiation. And this diagram is actually based on a blackboard sketch, which was sent to the designers of the stamps to use, which I think is pretty cool. And then here in the middle, we have a black hole. And on the right there, we have gravitational waves. Okay, so the world's first astronomy stamp. Well, this dates to 1887 when Brazil issued a perforated stamp. It was buff and blue in colour and depicts Crux Australis, the Southern Cross, which is an asterism of the constellation Crux seen in the Southern Hemisphere. And here is the stamp. So the asterism is astronomically accurate on the stamp with acrux and gacrux pointing the way to the south celestial pole, and is illustrated as if the observer were looking up to the sky from Earth. And stars are a really symbolic part of the Brazilian flag. They represent the constellations in the Southern Hemisphere, and they show how they were seen from Rio de Janeiro during the early hours of the morning on November 15th, 1889, the day the country shifted from an empire to a republic. So as you can see, the Southern Cross constellation is a really important part of their history and culture, so it is understandable that it would feature heavily on stamps. And as you will see over the next few slides, the Southern Cross was a favourite to print on Brazilian stamps for almost 10 years, with the colour and size of the stamp evolving over that time. And the second astronomy stamp, well, that was also issued in Brazil, and 3 years later in 1890, Brazil issued a further series of perforated postage stamps featuring the Southern Cross, but this time in a variety of colours and values, which is, you can see top right. And then the asterism featured for a second time in 1890, but this time on perforated newspaper stamps. So these were stamps that were used to pay for the cost of mailing newspapers or periodicals. And for this design, the asterism was illustrated shining above the Sugarloaf Mountain, Brazil's world famous landmark. It's bottom left here. So I'm not sure if you can see the asterism is in the middle of the circle there. And then just below the letter A in Journeys or Journeys, I'm not very good with languages. You can just see the Sugarloaf Mountain, quite small. And then these stamps were used again in 1898 when Brazil reissued the stamps as newspaper surcharge stamps, and they were overprinted with the year and stamp value. And the term surcharge describes any type of overprint that alters the price of a stamp, and surcharges raise or lower the face value of existing stamps when prices have changed too quickly to produce an appropriate new issue, for example, or just simply to use up surplus stocks. And you can see that there, bottom right. And the star appears. So Venus, the morning star, appeared on a set of stamps issued in Brazil again in 1894, and it is the first stamp featuring a planet. And these stamps are known as Madrugada Republicana, the Republican Dawn, and they commemorate the beginning of the Republican period. As I mentioned earlier, on the 15th of November, 1889, a group of military soldiers known as Republican Dawn overthrew Emperor Dom Pedro II, with the fall of the monarchy taking place around 8 AM that day. And research of astronomical charts has shown that Venus was visible in the morning sky at the time of the fall of the monarchy, affirming that the bright star on the stamp is undoubtedly Venus. So jumping ahead now to the 20th of June, 1930, and the 4th Pan-American Congress of Architects was held in Rio de Janeiro. And to commemorate this event, 3 stamps were issued, including a 300 wreath stamp illustrating the Southern Cross above the Sugarloaf, with the addition of 2 columns or architrave in the foreground. And if you compare this image to the previous stamps that have been issued, you'll notice that the asterism is a mirror image of its true self. And why is this? Well, the mirror image of the asterism on the 1930 stamp was perhaps illustrated as if the observer were looking down on the celestial sphere from above, as sailors and astronomers would have done when using an armillary sphere or astrolabe for navigation. And if you are unfamiliar with an armillary sphere, on the stamp here, it depicts an armillary sphere, and this was issued in Nicaragua in 1985, celebrating the return of Halley's Comet. And after all, the Southern Cross is depicted in reverse on the flag, and an astrolabe features on the Empire of Brazil flag, again tying in with Brazil's nautical history. I'm not entirely sure why the illustration of the Southern Cross was changed at this particular time on the stamp, so if anyone knows, please let me know. So slowly, other countries issued stamps with an astronomy theme. In 1930, Italy issued a stamp with aeroplane, and the Southern Cross again featured on this stamp here. You can see in the top right corner. Then in 1941, Norway issued a stamp depicting fishing boats with the aurora. The 50th anniversary of the Mizusawa Latitude Observatory in Japan was issued in 1949. The equatorial line monument marking the position of the equator featured on a stamp in Ecuador in 1949. And the International Year of Astronomy was celebrated on a stamp in San Marino in 2009. And space exploration featured on a stamp in Poland in 1970. And then the Hubble Space Telescope, for example, featured on a stamp issued in the USA in 1981. So while countries all over the world, from Colombia to Nigeria to Japan, Russia, they were all celebrating astronomy and humankind's achievements in space, the UK did not start commemorating astronomy in space until much later. And in 1966, the Royal Mail issued a stamp depicting a radio telescope at Jodrell Bank. It's bright yellow in colour, cost 4 pennies, and the stamp was issued within a set of 4, each image celebrating a different aspect of British technology. And then in 1970, the Royal Mail issued a stamp commemorating the 150th anniversary of the Royal Astronomical Society. It was issued within a set of 5 stamps celebrating anniversaries in the UK. As you can see, it's bright pink in colour. And the stamp depicts William Herschel holding a sketch of Uranus, which he discovered in 1781. And we have Francis Baily there in the middle, and an arc of, so Baily's beads, which is an arc of bright spots seen during a total or annual eclipse. It's actually named after Francis Baily. And then on the right there, we have John Herschel. He was William Herschel's son, and he is known for naming 7 moons of Saturn. And there, finally, on the right-hand side, we have Herschel's 40-foot telescope, which was constructed in Slough between 1785 and 1789. And again, I just think this is a really great example of, of what philately can teach us about astronomy. It's a very small stamp, but you can glean a lot of information from it. You'd want to know, well, who are they? What's William Herschel holding? What is the Royal Astronomical Society? And how on earth do you build a 40-foot telescope? So I've just selected 5 examples of astronomy stamps issued here in the UK over recent years. So you saw this one previously. In 2002, the Royal Mail issued a miniature sheet of stamps celebrating British astronomy. And whilst the pictures are very attractive, unfortunately, there seems to be a lack of connection to British astronomy and astronomers because all the images here were taken using the Hubble Space Telescope. And in 1768, James Cook boarded the ship Endeavour in Plymouth, and he set sail from England, and he sailed to Tahiti. And the voyage took around 8 months, and the purpose of the trip was to view the transit of Venus with the aim to gather astronomical information to measure the solar system. And the Royal Mail issued a set of 6 stamps in August 2018 to commemorate the 250th anniversary of the voyage of James Cook and his companions. And James Cook and Charles Green, they made drawings during their observation of the transit, and these have been used on a first-class stamp, which you can see here, called the Endeavour Voyage, and superimposed onto an image of the sun. And one of the most interesting details of the drawings is a black drop effect that they observed during the transit, which you can see on the stamp. And the stamp is also illustrated with a sextant, which was used for navigation purposes during the voyage. And on the right here, one of the Millennium projects commemorated on stamps was the National Space Centre at Leicester. The centre, which has a particularly distinctive space-age building, was not finished at the time the stamp was released in 2000. So unfortunately, it couldn't feature on the stamp. So instead, the Millennium Project is just represented by a generic picture of the night sky. In 1987, the Royal Mail issued 4 stamps marking the 300th anniversary of Isaac Newton's Principia. And despite their small size, the stamps are bursting with information about Newton's accomplishments. The 34-pence stamp, bottom right, portrays a satellite along with Newton's insights on projectile motion and orbits. And the 22-pence stamp, top right, honours his study of planetary motion through the depiction of 6 planets orbiting the sun, on top of which is an impressive coronal loop. And you can just see that underneath the 22-pence. And the 50th anniversary of Patrick Moore's BBC TV programme, The Sky at Night, was commemorated by a set of 6 colourful and attractive stamps, which were released in 2007. And the designs show, for example, the Cat's Eye Nebula, the Saturn Nebula, and the Helix Nebula. And superimposed on each image is an outline of the home constellation with the location of the object marked. And all objects are identified with a number beginning with the letter C, which is a reference in Patrick's own brand Caldwell catalogue, because Patrick Moore's full name was Patrick Caldwell Moore. So what about Canada? I didn't want to leave you guys out. I wanted to make it relevant to you, so I've included a slide. I think I've got 5 astronomy themed stamps that have been issued in Canada. So the first one, this stamp was issued commemorating the launch of Alouette 2, a Canadian research satellite launched in 1965. It was designed to explore the ionosphere, and this was actually the first stamp celebrating Canadian space achievement. And in 2000, another stamp was issued commemorating Canada in space as part of the Millennium Collection, and it celebrates Canada's involvement in space. The stamp illustrates several Canadian launched satellites and the Canada Arm, which has been used aboard many US shuttle missions, and of course the International Space Station. In 2009, celebrating the International Year of Astronomy, 2 stamps were issued, and they recognise the important role that Canadians have had in uncovering the mysteries of outer space. On the left here, you can see the Horsehead Nebula, which features alongside an image of Canada's National Research Council's Astrophysical Observatory in British Columbia. And then on the right there is the Eagle Nebula, which features alongside an image of the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope. Although this stamp wasn't issued in Canada, I thought it was a really great one to show. It was issued in 2017 in Guernsey, the Channel Islands, and the stamp celebrates coastal eclipses, and Vancouver was treated to a partial solar eclipse in 2017 when 85% of the sun's disk was obscured. And the final one, you saw this one earlier, 2 stamps were issued in 2018 celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. Okay, and I found this interesting kind of crossover between philately and astronomy a few weeks ago. I was reading through this paper here called Adjusting Object Glasses of Refracting Telescopes. And yeah, it was mentioned in this article that German telescope makers have actually used postage stamps to separate the objective lenses and apochromatic telescopes. And using these stamps, it sometimes replaced the need to use mucilage on paper or tinfoil, because obviously the stamp was not only very, very thin, but it was also already coated in a gum. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty fun kind of example of philately in astronomy, and I'm looking forward to reading more on that. So assembling an astronomy and space themed collection. Well, you've probably already noticed that everything from astronomers to telescopes and constellations, they all appear on stamps, and I've kind of just given you a real mishmash of examples. And as you all know, there isn't much point in collecting stamps if you aren't going to learn something from this. And you know, it's why I love collecting stamps with an astronomy theme so much. And Margaret Morris, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with her, she lives in Scotland. She published a paper in 2013 called Astronomy Philately, where she discussed the 2 subjects. And she's grouped her collection into 3 main groups, and I think this is a really useful way of organizing a philately philately collection within the subjects of astronomy. So she's grouped hers into the observers. So I'm just going to give you my own examples of astronomers and astronomical anniversaries, which fall under this grouping of the observers. Then she has the observables. So again, I've chosen examples of our solar system and everyone's favorite comets. And the third one that she has in her paper, observations. So I'll look at astronomical instruments. And I actually added my own 4th topic here, because I don't think this topic kind of fits into any of the 3 that she has mentioned, perhaps because it could be classed as astrophilately rather than, you know, astronomy themed. But I didn't want to leave it out because, you know, I think it's a very important part of this, astronomy and space. So I'm just going to be looking at human exploration and achievements, which includes space race and the moon landing. Okay, so the observers. So we all know that astronomy is one of the oldest natural sciences, and this subject has been celebrated on stamps all over the world. And astronomy dates back to the 4th millennium BC. Babylonian astronomers were skilled observers and mathematicians, and they studied the sky and devoted their time to studying the planetary movements and adopted the use of the zodiacal belt. And they also recorded observations of comets and eclipses. And these studies were recorded on cuneiform clay tablets. And this stamp from Austria, issued in 1965, depicts a cuneiform clay tablet. And these tablets show a really good understanding of arithmetic, algebra, and geometry. And by the 3rd millennium BC, Egyptians had already adopted a 365-day year, and annual flooding of the Nile was determined observing the stars. And this stamp here depicts Hathor, which was issued in the Central African Republic in 1964. And according to ancient myths, Hathor was a sky goddess, known as Lady of Stars and Sovereign of Stars, and linked to the star Sirius. And she was originally a personification of the Milky Way, which was considered to be the milk that flowed from the udders of a heavenly cow. And the Chinese, well, China has a really long history of astronomy dating back to the 2nd millennium BC. In a 2nd century tomb, a silk roll was found which depicts comets, and it's considered the first atlas of comets. And the stamp here on the bottom left was issued in China in 1986 and commemorates the return of Halley's Comet, and the image on the stamp echoes images that feature on the scroll. So observations of celestial bodies and scientific discoveries have shaped our way of thinking about our place in the universe. So jumping ahead now from the ancient observers to the scientists and astronomers who changed our view of our place in the universe over the last few centuries. Copernicus, he's a really popular astronomer to feature on stamps. He was from Poland, and he proposed that the planets have the sun as the fixed point to which their motions are to be referred. And he featured on a stamp here issued in Poland in 1942. Here he is again on a stamp issued in Hungary in 1973 to commemorate 500 years since his birth. And the stamp there on the left, I think, is a great example of a Cinderella stamp. And yeah, I just love the design of that stamp. I think it's fantastic. Then we have Tycho Brahe. He was a Danish nobleman, astronomer, a writer, and he was known for his accurate and comprehensive astronomical observations. And he was a real character. In fact, he had a false nose made of brass, which had been cut off during a sword fight. And he formed his own system, the Tychonic system, and his system correctly saw the moon as orbiting the Earth and the planets as orbiting the sun, but erroneously considered the sun to be orbiting the Earth. And Johann Kepler, he was Tycho's assistant. Kepler was convinced, he was a convinced Copernican, and he considered Tycho's model to be mistaken. But he is also, of course, famous for his laws of planetary motion, and he was commemorated on a stamp in the Czech Republic in 2009. The father of astronomy, Galileo, he was an astronomer, an engineer, and a physicist, and he is famous for his use of the telescope and making celestial observations. He observed the phases of Venus and the 4 largest satellites of Jupiter. And whilst he wasn't the first person to observe the moon, he was one of the first to make topographical charts estimating the heights of the mountains on the moon. And he was commemorated on a stamp issued in Ascension in 1971. And Sir Isaac Newton, he's recognized as one of the greatest mathematicians and scientists of all time. He was born in England, and Newton formulated the laws of motion and made seminal contributions to optics. And he was celebrated on a postage stamp in 1987 in Grenada, illustrated holding the apple that was said to give him his inspiration to formulate the theory of gravity. So just to keep the observers theme going, you've seen the stamp before. It was a commemorative stamp issued in 1970, celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Royal Astronomical Society. And on February 11th, 2020, excuse me, the Royal Mail issued a set of stamps to commemorate the bicentenary of the Royal Astronomical Society. It was formed on January the 12th, 1820 at a tavern in London, and the society has now grown to 4,000 members and is one of the most eminent societies in the world promoting astronomy and geophysics. So this issue, called Visions of the Universe, has 8 stamps in total, illustrating astronomical phenomena. We have Comet 67P, for example. We've got the Cat's Eye Nebula, pulsars, Jupiter's auroras, gravitational lensing, and black holes. And each stamp includes one simple line of text that describes phenomena which has been discovered or investigated by British astronomers and astrophysicists. So, for example, here on the left, the black hole stamp displays the text, "Black holes are superdense regions of space." And this is a nod to the English natural philosopher John Michell, who first suggested their existence in 1783, and the late famous British professor and theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking, who made predictions about their behavior. And these stamps were illustrated by a guy called Robert Ball. I'm sure you will agree that the stamps are very colourful in hues of blue and red, and they bring to life these amazing phenomena in a way that photographs certainly could not. And in particular, just to go back to the black hole stamp on the left, this image is actually based on the work of Dr. Ziri Younsi of University College London, and he was part of the Event Horizon telescope team that captured the groundbreaking first image of a black hole in 2019. I'm sure you'll remember seeing that photograph. And he shared computer models of his work on black holes with the illustrator of the stamps to inform the illustrated design. So I think, yeah, these stamps, they're a really fitting celebration for the bicentenary of such a prestigious society, and to the contributions of British scientists. So the observables, what have the observers been looking at? So our solar system, it's home to the sun, 8 planets, and fascinating astronomical objects, including comets, asteroids, and dwarf planets such as Pluto. And on the 16th of October 2012, the Royal Mail celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first British satellite, Ariel 1. Images of our incredible solar system featured on 6 detailed stamps. Using imagery taken from various probes, colour and imagination were brought to life, giving us armchair astronomers a real kind of close-up view of these mysterious worlds. And each image has a relationship with the UK's involvement in astronomy. And the sun here, featured on a first-class stamp, of the fiery orange image of the sun was photographed by the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory, which was a joint project between the European Space Agency and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, also known as NASA. And the spacecraft continues to make observations of the sun's chromosphere, atmosphere, and corona, despite it initially only being a 2-year mission. And planets featuring on the stamp set include Venus and Mars. Venus and Mars are Earth's nearest neighbours, and the images chosen on the first class and 77 pen stamps are examples of how beautiful our fellow rocky planets are. And the exploration of Venus and Mars have strong UK connections. The Venus Express mission was proposed by scientists at Oxford University, and the image taken by ESA's Mars Express probe was the first European mission to Mars, with the UK having involvement in 3 of the 6 onboard instruments. I'll just take a drink. And Earth featured on its own stamp in 1984, when the Royal Mail commemorated the 100-year anniversary of the adoption of the Greenwich Meridian, the world's prime meridian. And the image chosen on the 16 pen stamp is that of Earth as seen from Apollo 11, with a curved red line of 0 longitude superimposed on top. And this was a very exciting time for people in the UK in 1999. Well, depending where you were in the UK, some of us got to experience a total solar eclipse, and 7 stamps were issued in that year by Guernsey Post Office to commemorate the eclipse. And these are a fantastic set, taking the collector through the 5 stages of the eclipse, including the first and second contact. You can see totality and Bailey's beads and the diamond ring effect. And 6 of the stamps hold a value and can be used for postage, whilst the 7th on the end there is a Cinderella stamp and has no value. Okay, comets. Well, they've been the cause and fascination and of fear and fascination for centuries. Originating from the cold, darker outer reaches of the solar system, comets are composed of ice and rock, and they featured here on the right-hand side on a miniature sheet issued in India in 2018. And they originate from 2 locations, the Kuiper Belt and the Oort cloud. Comets originating from the Kuiper Belt are short period comets and can orbit the sun in less than 200 years, whereas comets originating from the Oort cloud take much longer to orbit the sun, often thousands of years, and are known as long period comets. So we have this fantastic shape stamp here, issued in Finland in 2014 for the Signs in the Sky issue, and 2 stamps here issued in Congo in 1986. On the left here we have Comet Ikea-Seki, and on the right we have Comet West, which was seen in 1976. Halley's Comet, maybe some of you guys saw this back in the 80s. It's named after the famous astronomer Edmund Halley, or Hawley. I say Halley. So Halley's Comet is perhaps the most famous short period comet in our history due to its return period of 76 years. And some of us may see it twice in our lifetime. The comet has been recorded as far back as 240 BC in China, and it was even embroidered into the world famous Bayeux tapestry. And a souvenir stamp sheet here issued in Bolivia in 1986 features scene 32 from the Bayeux tapestry, and the comet can clearly be seen on the upper border. And the appearance of the comet in 1985, it was celebrated globally on stamps, and here in the UK, and the Royal Mail issued a fantastic set of 4 stamps the following year in 1986, which were illustrated by the famous cartoonist, a guy called Ralph Steadman. And the stamps are colourful and imaginative, as you can see. The bottom right there, we have a rather disgruntled but comical looking Halley. Then on the left-hand side, an image of 2 comets, which represents seeing the comet twice in a lifetime. Top right there, we have the Giotto spacecraft. And on the left there, we have the comet orbiting the sun. And a set of first day covers that I really enjoy collecting were issued by the Presentation Philatelic Services in London between, I think, 1984 and 1995. And the card inlay with each cover has this really kind of interesting text explaining that each issue depicts a fine art painting or other collectible auction by Sotheby's of London. So for example here, this first day cover issued with a Halley's Comet stamp set You can see on the left-hand side, it's got a really beautiful silk cachet of a portable refracting telescope manufactured by Peter Dolland. He was a well-known maker of optical instruments. And the card inlay, when you take that out, it tells you all about that. And it also tells you that the telescope was sold by Sotheby's at auction in 1985 for £22,000. Hale, Bopp and NEOWISE. It's 26 years this year that Hale, Bopp was discovered. It moved across our skies for approximately 18 months. And Hale, Bopp was the most observed comet of the 20th century, but that has since been trumped by NEOWISE. And the comet was discovered independently by Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp in the US on the 23rd of July, 1995. And the comet passed perihelion, so the closest approach to Earth, on the 1st of April, 1997. And as far as I'm aware, there are very few stamps out there that celebrated this exciting event. But we have these two here. On the 1st of April, 1997, the Dominican Republic issued a set of stamps depicting the comet positioned against a tropical pink and yellow sky. And you can see clearly in both stamps, it's two tails of gas and dust. And in my collection, I have a custom cover commemorating the comet. It was sent to me by a former NASA employee who specializes in making his own covers. Some of you may know him, Pedro Sarmiento. I think that's how you pronounce his surname. But the cover is postmarked at Cloudcroft, New Mexico on the 24th of March, 1997, which was 2 days after the comet made its closest approach to Earth. And Cloudcroft is the location where Alan Hale first made the discovery, and the image on the cover illustrates the position of the comet in the night sky from the date of its discovery to the date it was last observed in the southern hemisphere. So really this cover, it's not about the stamp, it's all about the postmark. And for those astronomers amongst us, Comet NEOWISE, wouldn't have passed you by last year. It was first discovered on March 27th, 2020 by the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer. And the comet's closest approach to Earth was on the 23rd of July last year. And the comet could easily be seen with the naked eye, even in urban areas. And yet it trumps Hale, Bopp because it's now known as one of the brightest comets seen since Hale, Bopp's appearance. And this year, a set of 6 stamps were issued in June, I think it was, commemorating the 10-year anniversary of Sark being designated a dark sky island, and Sark is in Guernsey. And yeah, one of the stamps featured a photograph of NEOWISE. And as far as I'm aware, I think this is maybe the only stamp that actually features NEOWISE, but I could be wrong. Okay, so the observations, so the tools of the observers, how were people observing? For thousands of years, our ancestors looked to the sky, they observed and named the stars and constellations after animals, objects, and mythological characters, and they would worship the solstices and watch the planets traversing across the sky. And all of these early attempts at recording and understanding the sky have been found on the designs of stamps. So the prehistoric monument of Stonehenge in Wiltshire, it's been studied for a very long time for its possible connections with ancient astronomy. The site is aligned in the direction of the sunrise of the summer solstice and the sunset of the winter solstice. And archaeoastronomers have made a range of further claims about the site's connection to astronomy, its meaning, and its use. And it has appeared twice on stamps here in the UK, once in 1990, which you can see on the left, celebrating the subject of astronomy. And you can see just the bottom left there, there's an image of a gyroscope, Stonehenge in the middle, and on the right-hand side, a ship navigating by the stars. And I really like, along the arc on the top, you've got the phases of the moon. And it appeared again on a stamp in 2005, which celebrated World Heritage Sites. And the Nebra Sky Disk, well, this is a bronze disk. It's blue and gold in color, about 30 centimeters in diameter. And it was found in Germany in 1999 by metal detectorists. And the symbols are interpreted generally as the sun or full moon, a lunar crescent, and a group of stars there, a cluster of stars, perhaps depicting the Pleiades. And 2 golden arcs along the sides are interpreted to mark the angle between the solstices, may have been added later. And a final addition is another arc at the bottom, surrounded with multiple strokes of uncertain meaning, but perhaps it is a solar barge with numerous oars. It could be the Milky Way or even a rainbow. And archaeologists place its origins in the first millennium BCE, and the disc may be an astronomical instrument, and it featured on a postage stamp here in Germany in 2008, celebrating German archaeology. And other astronomical instruments that have been attributed to watching and recording our skies include the astrolabe, an armillary sphere, but perhaps the most important of all is the telescope. And you can see an example here, and it featured on a stamp in Sierra Leone, commemorating the 450th anniversary of Copernicus's death. So telescopes are often housed in observatories, and in 1921, the first stamp depicting an observatory was issued in central Lithuania, produced in two forms. You can see there, top left, in perforate and imperforate form, and the image on the stamps displays the Poxabutt Observatory, which is named after the astronomer Marston Poxabutt, who was famous for his observational work and for computing the orbit of Mercury. And the observatory theme continued. In 1948, the US printed their first astronomy-themed 3-cent stamp with an image of the Paloma Mountain Observatory. And the stamp was issued to commemorate the observatory's opening. The observatory houses the Hale telescope, a 200-inch telescope named after George Hale, who was a famous American solar astronomer, well known for his work on the discovery of magnetic fields in sunspots. And the last section now, the explorers. So from July 1957 to December 1958, scientists from 67 countries participated in various Earth science projects as part of the International Geophysical Year. And to mark this occasion, the US Post Office issued a stamp featuring a striking illustration of the sun, which was in the most active phase of its 11-year cycle, solar cycle 19, the 19th solar cycle since 1755, and also depicts a section of Michelangelo's famous Sistine Chapel painting, The Creation of Adam, which is a nod to our natural curiosity and desire to understand our place in the universe. And the International Geophysical Year came at a time when the Soviet Union and the US were locked in a heated race to be the first nation to go to space. And the Soviet Union succeeded on the 4th of October 1957, when Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, was launched into low Earth orbit. And the satellite survived just under 3 months in space before falling back to Earth and burning up in our atmosphere. And the Soviet Union issued its first Sputnik stamp, which you can see there, on the 4th of November 1957. And the 40 kopeck perforated stamp was a simple design. It's blue and grey in colour and illustrates the satellite orbiting the Earth. And the launch of Sputnik has been celebrated globally on stamps, including Romania, Cuba, and Korea. And after the successful launch of Laika, the space dog, aboard Sputnik 2, there she is, on the 3rd of November 1957, a further triumph came for the Soviet Union on the 12th of April 1961, when Yuri Gagarin was launched aboard Vostok 1, and he orbited the Earth for 108 minutes before he returned to Earth. And Gagarin was the first man in space and the first man to orbit the Earth. And not one to shy away from celebrating their achievements through philately, a plethora of stamps from the Soviet Union commemorating this momentous event exists, including this rather wonderful 10 kopeck stamp, which is a great example of Soviet space propaganda, illustrating Gagarin looking to the stars as Vostok 1 shoots off into the sky above a silhouetted skyline. And you can see there the date of the launch in the rocket's wake. So whilst the Soviet Union blazed a trail into space, the USA was successful in their own first. And on the 20th of July, 1969, the crew of Apollo 11 were the first to land on the moon in their lunar module, the Eagle, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped onto the moon on the 21st of July. And needless to say, there was an explosion in the issue of stamps and memorabilia celebrating this milestone. And the single 10-cent stamp issued in this September was designed by Paul Calais. Excuse me if I get his name wrong. This was issued to celebrate mankind's historic visit to our celestial neighbour, and it illustrates Neil Armstrong setting foot on the moon, embarking from Eagle, the lunar lander. And the engraving plates for the postage stamp, they were actually carried to the surface of the moon by the Apollo 11 astronauts, and it now resides in the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. And who is Paul Calais, you may be asking? Well, he was one of the first 8 artists chosen by NASA in 1962 to document the American space program's Project Mercury in a space art career spanning more than 40 years. He's covered Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and space shuttle missions, and he was the only artist present with the Apollo 11 crew on the morning of July 16th, 1969, as they prepared for the historic launch to the moon. Really fascinating guy. And in 1989, for the 20th anniversary of the moon landing, the Postal Service asked Paul's son, Chris, to design the $2.40 priority mail stamp, and Paul designed the first day cover. And in my collection here, I'm very lucky to have this. Again, it was sent from a friend in America. It's the cover signed by Chris and Paul. And in 1994, for the 25th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, Paul and Chris jointly designed 2 US stamps commemorating the event. So on the right there, we have a 29-cent commemorative stamp, and next to it is the $9.95 express mail stamp. So just a couple more slides to go. And the past couple of years, they've been no exception to the issue of Apollo 11 stamps. To commemorate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, the US Postal Service issued 2 vertical forever stamps on the 20th of July 2019. Very simple design. The images depict the iconic photograph of Buzz Aldrin taken by Neil Armstrong and the Apollo 11 landing site on the moon, the Sea of Tranquility, which you can see there marked with a dot. And the Isle of Man here over in the UK, they kept the Apollo theme going in 2019 with some really beautiful stamps. And they released a set of 8 stamps to commemorate the 50th anniversary of man landing on the moon. One small step explores 50 years of lunar exploration and tells a story of the first 12 Apollo missions. And they depict famous images, including mission control at NASA, the famous photograph Earthrise taken by William Anders during the Apollo 8 mission, and the first footprints on the moon. And I just really love the details of the stamp, so I've just blown one up here. Around the perforations are famous quotes from people involved in the missions, including President Kennedy and the astronauts from each mission. And each stamp features the map coordinates of a place relating to the theme of each stamp. So for example, here, the Project Apollo stamp, it displays on the bottom left vertical. That's the coordinates of the Rice Stadium, where Kennedy delivered his speech announcing the Apollo program in 1962. And along the right-hand side there, you can see his famous quote, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade." Okay, so last slide. How did you get started in collecting astronomy themed stamps? Well, I think the easiest and cheapest way is obviously research on the internet, type in what it is you're really interested in, what you fancy, and look up these subjects on auction websites, eBay, we've got Delcamp, Coolnet, all fantastic resources. Join an Astronomy Stamp Society, or any stamp society really. I mean, I'm the ambassador now for the Astro Space Stamp Society. We've got about 60 members all over the world, so numbers do feel like they're dwindling a little bit, but I'm hoping to pick that back up. But yeah, we produce a magazine every 2 months called Orbit, and it's just jam-packed full of astronomy and space themed articles. And of course, you've got the American Philatelic Society, you've got the American Topical Association, we've got the Astronomy Study Unit, I've forgotten the name, and yeah, and books as well. These 2 fantastic books, The Race to the Moon by Umberto Cavallaro and Stamping Through Astronomy by Renato Ducati, absolutely fantastic resources to really get you going in those subjects. And yeah, buy magazines, Stanley Gibbons catalogs, there's all sorts out there, so you won't be disappointed. So thank you so much. If you want to get in touch, please email me or look me up on social media, and I really appreciate you all listening. Thank you.